I was already out of the grave. That's the part my SEAL Admiral never understood. When he buried me alive, packing the dirt over my face with his boots, he didn't expect me to still be breathing. He didn't expect me to hear his voice saying, "No one will dig you out. This is where your story ends." I felt every handful of dirt hit my chest. I felt my lungs collapsing. And when I finally stopped moving, he walked away. He really believed I was dead. But then, a single gunshot cracked through the air, and the look on his face when he turned around and saw me standing there, covered in dirt, shaking, the muzzle still smoking, was the moment everything changed. Before I tell you how I crawled out of my own grave, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps this channel alive. I should not be alive right now. I'm standing here on this cliff, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, and all I can think about is dirt. The taste of it still lingers in my mouth sometimes, even though it's been months. The weight of it pressing against my chest, forcing the air out of my lungs, making me choose between breathing and fighting. You know what's fucked up? The ocean is so peaceful right now. These gentle waves, this soft breeze, it's the complete opposite of what happened to me. It's like nature is mocking the violence, pretending that men like Admiral Klein don't exist. Pretending that people entrusted with shaping warriors don't sometimes become the very monsters we're trained to fight. But they do exist. And the gunshot he heard that night wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his nightmare. Let me take you back to where this all started, because you need to understand something about me. I didn't grow up expecting anything from this world. I grew up fighting for every scrap of respect, every moment of recognition, every breath of air that wasn't filled with someone else's hatred. I didn't grow up privileged, but I grew up fighting. My childhood was a masterclass in being invisible. Not the good kind of invisible, not the tactical, strategic invisibility they teach you in special ops. I'm talking about the soul-crushing invisibility of being poor, of being dismissed, of being looked through like you're made of glass. My father worked 3 jobs just to keep us in a trailer that leaked every time it rained. My mother cleaned houses for people who wouldn't let her use their front door. And me? I learned early that if you want something in this world, you better be ready to bleed for it. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, was going to hand me anything. I remember the guidance counselor at my high school looking at my grades, looking at my test scores, and then looking at my address. You could see the calculation happening in his eyes. Good grades from the wrong zip code. Smart kid from the wrong family. He actually said to me, "Maybe you should consider trade school. College might not be realistic for someone in your situation." Someone in my situation, like being poor, was a fucking disease. That's when I decided to join the Navy. Not because I had some romantic notion about serving my country, though that came later. I joined because I wanted to prove that a kid from a leaking trailer could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone. I wanted to show that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. I worked twice as hard as everyone else in boot camp, while other recruits were calling home complaining about the food or the drills I was studying. While they were sleeping, I was running. While they were making excuses, I was making myself into something unbreakable. And it worked. I earned respect through grit, through discipline, through keeping my mouth shut and my performance loud. The other recruits stopped seeing me as the poor kid and started seeing me as the one who never quit. The instructors stopped looking at my background and started looking at my results. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But then I got selected for SEAL training, and I realized I hadn't seen anything yet. My first day at the SEAL base was like walking into a different universe. Everything was louder. The voices, the equipment, the very air seemed to vibrate with intensity. This wasn't just military, this was elite military. These weren't just soldiers, these were weapons in human form. And from minute one, every recruit whispered the same name with the same expression of pure terror: Admiral Klein. "He'll break you before lunch," one guy told me during orientation. "Don't make eye contact unless he asks you a direct question," another warned. "He's not building soldiers," a third recruit said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's breaking spirits." I should have listened. I should have kept my head down, followed the rules, and tried to become invisible again. But here's the thing about growing up fighting. You develop this radar for bullies. You can sense them from across a room. And everything I heard about Admiral Klein set off every alarm bell in my system. The first time I saw him, he was standing in the middle of the training yard, perfectly still while chaos erupted around him. Recruits were running drills, carrying equipment, shouting commands, and he was just watching, like a predator studying a herd, looking for the weak one to separate from the pack. His uniform was immaculate. His posture was textbook. His face was carved from stone. And when his eyes swept across the group of new recruits, I felt them pause on me. Just for a second, but long enough for me to know that I was already on his radar. From the start, I felt those cold, calculating eyes lingering on me, measuring me, evaluating me, and finding me wanting. The first time Admiral Klein spoke directly to me, I knew I was in trouble. It was during a demolitions drill. We were learning to handle C4 and I was executing the procedure flawlessly. Every movement precise. Every safety protocol followed to the letter. I'd studied this stuff until I could do it blindfolded, and it showed. When I finished, the instructor nodded approvingly. A few of the other recruits looked impressed. I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction, thinking maybe I'd finally proven myself worthy of being here. That's when Admiral Klein's voice cut through the air like a blade. Recruits like you don't survive long. I turned to see him standing about 10 feet away, his arms crossed, that stone face, wearing what might have been a smirk if it had been on any other human being. Sir, I managed. You heard me. I've seen your type before. Poor kid, chip on his shoulder, something to prove. You think technical proficiency makes you special. You think following procedures makes you elite. He took a step closer, and I could smell his cologne. Expensive, clean, the complete opposite of everything I'd grown up around. But you know what you really are? You're a pretender. You're playing dress up in a uniform you haven't earned. And sooner or later, when the real pressure hits, you're going to break. Because that's what people like you do. People like me. There it was again. That fucking phrase that had followed me my entire life. The entire training yard had gone quiet. Every recruit, every instructor, everyone was watching this moment unfold. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. Would I defend myself? Would I argue? Would I do something stupid that would give him an excuse to bury me right then and there? Instead, I did what I'd been doing my entire life. I swallowed the rage, kept my mouth shut, and said, "Yes, sir." But he wasn't done. He turned to address the entire group, making sure everyone could hear. Take a good look at this recruit. Study him. Because in 6 months, you'll need to remember what failure looks like. He walked away then, leaving me standing there with my face burning and my hands clenched into fists. The other recruits slowly went back to their drills, but I could feel their sideways glances. I could hear their whispered conversations. That was the moment Admiral Klein quietly marked me as a threat. And as a target. What came next wasn't training. It was warfare. Klein didn't just push me harder than the other recruits. He created an entirely different set of rules for me. While everyone else got standard PT, I got punishment details that would have made a medieval torturer proud. While everyone else got regulation equipment, mine somehow always malfunctioned at the worst possible moments. I'd show up for a navigation exercise and find my compass had been tampered with. I'd prep for a diving drill and discover my oxygen gauge was reading incorrectly. During weapons training, my rifle would jam on the first shot every single time. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Bad luck. The kind of equipment failures that happen in high-stress training environments. But then I started paying attention to the patterns. It was always my equipment. It was always during evaluations. And it was always when Admiral Klein was watching. The breaking point came during a night infiltration exercise. We were supposed to move through a mock enemy compound without being detected. Simple enough, except my night vision goggles went completely dark halfway through the course. I'm crawling through razor wire in complete darkness, trying to navigate by sound and touch, when I hear footsteps behind me. Not the careful, measured steps of an instructor observing the exercise. These were angry footsteps. Purposeful footsteps. Having trouble, recruit? Klein's voice was right behind me. I could feel his breath on my neck. "Equipment malfunction, sir," I said, my face still pressed into the dirt. "Equipment malfunction," he repeated, like he was tasting the words. "Or operator error?" "Sir, the night vision." I didn't ask for excuses. Asked if you're having trouble. There was something in his voice that made my blood run cold. This wasn't standard instructor intimidation. This was personal. This was hatred.
"No, sir."
No trouble.
"Good."
Because recruits who can't handle their equipment tend to have accidents during training. He walked away then, leaving me in the dark. Literally and figuratively. I finished that exercise without night vision, navigating by memory and instinct, and somehow managed to complete the course faster than half the recruits who had functioning equipment. When I reported to the debriefing station, covered in mud and bleeding from a dozen small cuts, Klein was waiting for me. "Interesting performance," he said, looking at his clipboard. "But I'll need to mark you down for equipment failure. Can't have recruits who don't maintain their gear properly." That's when I realized this wasn't about making me a better soldier. This was about destroying me. But the equipment sabotage was just the beginning. Klein escalated his campaign against me in ways that were both creative and cruel. He'd call me out during formations, making me recite regulations in front of the entire unit, then interrupt me halfway through to point out some imaginary mistake. He'd assign me extra duties that would keep me awake for 48 hours straight, then schedule my evaluations during my mandatory rest periods. The psychological warfare was even worse than the physical exhaustion. He had this way of making you question everything about yourself. Your competence. Your worthiness. Your right to be there at all. During one particularly brutal week, he made me clean the same section of barracks 17 times. Each time I'd finish, he'd find some microscopic imperfection, a dust mote on a windowsill, a barely visible scuff mark on the floor, and order me to start over. "Attention to detail, recruit," he'd say with that cold smile. "Elite operators notice everything. Apparently, you're not elite." By the fourth day, I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. My hands were raw from scrubbing. My knees were bleeding from crawling around on the floor with a toothbrush. But I kept going because quitting would prove him right. Quitting would validate every terrible thing he'd said about people like me. The other recruits watched all of this in silence. I could see the sympathy in their eyes, the recognition that what was happening to me was beyond normal training stress. But they also saw what happened to anyone who spoke up on my behalf. Recruit Morrison made the mistake of suggesting that maybe I'd cleaned the barracks well enough after the 10th iteration. Klein reassigned him to kitchen duty for 2 weeks, the kind of kitchen duty where you're peeling potatoes at 3 in the morning and scrubbing grease traps until your fingernails fall off. Message received. Keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, and thank God it's not happening to you. But here's what Klein didn't understand about people like me. We don't break the way he expected us to. When you grow up fighting for everything, when you learn early that the world doesn't owe you shit, you develop a different relationship with pain. You learn to metabolize suffering and convert it into fuel. Every humiliation made me more determined. Every sabotage attempt made me more careful. Every sleepless night made me stronger. I started documenting everything. Times, dates, witnesses. I memorized serial numbers on equipment before training exercises. I learned to double-check everything twice, then triple-check it just to be sure. And slowly, very slowly, I started to outperform everyone else despite the constant interference. My marksmanship scores were perfect. My physical fitness tests were off the charts. My tactical evaluations were flawless. No matter what Klein threw at me, I found a way to excel, which only made him angrier. The mission that changed everything happened during what they called adaptive leadership training. It was supposed to be a routine simulation, a hostage rescue scenario in a mock urban environment. 3 teams, each with different entry points, coordinating to extract civilians from a simulated terrorist stronghold. I was assigned to Team Charlie, which had the most dangerous approach, a blind insertion through what the instructors called the funnel. It was a narrow alley between 2 buildings where you couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead and had no cover if things went sideways. Standard procedure was for the team leader to scout ahead and signal the all clear before the rest of the unit advanced. But 30 seconds before insertion, Klein pulled our team leader aside for additional briefing. "You're in charge now," he told me. "Don't fuck it up." It was a setup. I knew it was a setup. Everyone knew it was a setup. But orders are orders, especially in the middle of a training exercise with instructors watching your every move. I led my team into the funnel, every nerve in my body screaming that something was wrong. The silence was too complete. The shadows were too deep. And Admiral Klein was watching from a position where he couldn't possibly evaluate our tactical performance, but could perfectly observe any mistakes I might make. Halfway through the alley, the ambush hit. Simulated gunfire erupted from windows above us. Smoke grenades detonated, filling the narrow space with thick, choking clouds. And in that chaos, I realized that our opposition force wasn't following the safety protocols we'd been briefed on. They were using live flashbangs instead of simulators, real smoke grenades instead of training versions. And the gunfire, while still using blanks, was coming from positions that put my team in actual danger if anyone slipped or fell. In that moment, I had a choice: follow orders and keep my team moving through what was rapidly becoming a genuinely dangerous situation, or call an audible and get everyone to safety. I called the audible. "Team Charlie, emergency extraction." I shouted over the chaos. "Fall back to checkpoint Alpha." We pulled out of the funnel just as a simulated IED detonated, right where we would have been advancing. The blast was strong enough to crack windows in the surrounding buildings. Strong enough to cause real injury if anyone had been in the kill zone. My team was safe. But I deviated from the mission plan. When we reached the debriefing station, Admiral Klein was waiting with a clipboard and a look that could have frozen napalm. "Explain yourself, recruit." "Sir, the safety protocols were being violated. My team was in danger of actual injury. I made the tactical decision to extract rather than risk casualties." "Your team was in danger," he repeated slowly. "Or you were scared?" The other instructors were watching now. The entire exercise had stopped. Every recruit, every officer, everyone was focused on this moment. "Sir, I assessed the situation and determined that." "You determined," he interrupted, "that you knew better than your commanding officers. You determined that your judgment superseded direct orders. You determined that you could abandon your mission because things got a little uncomfortable." A little uncomfortable. We were talking about potential serious injury, and he called it a little uncomfortable. That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Admiral Klein wasn't just willing to destroy my career. He was willing to let people get hurt to do it. Furthermore, he continued, consulting his clipboard, "Your reckless abandonment of the mission objective resulted in mission failure for the entire exercise. 3 teams, 6 hours of preparation, all wasted because one recruit decided to play it safe." He turned to address the group. "This is what happens when we lower our standards. This is what happens when we let the wrong people into our ranks. They bring their weakness with them, and it infects everyone around them. But here's the thing about truth. It has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it." 2 days later, recruits Jackson and Peters from my team approached me quietly during chow. "We saw what really happened in that funnel," Jackson whispered. "That wasn't standard opposition force behavior. They were way off protocol." "Peters got flash burned on his neck," Jackson continued. "Real burn, not simulation. And that IED was way too powerful for a training exercise." They weren't the only ones who noticed. Other instructors had started asking questions. Safety officers were requesting incident reports. And slowly, very slowly, a picture began to emerge of an exercise that had been deliberately sabotaged to create maximum danger for my team. But Admiral Klein had already submitted his official report. According to his version of events, I had demonstrated cowardice under simulated combat conditions and reckless disregard for mission objectives. He recommended immediate dismissal from the SEAL program. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Here was a man entrusted with training the next generation of warriors, and he was actively trying to get his own people hurt to settle a personal grudge. This betrayal became the seed of his desperate move later. Because Admiral Klein realized something that terrified him. Despite everything he'd thrown at me, I was still there, still performing. still earning the respect of my teammates and the attention of higher-ranking officers. I wasn't breaking the way he'd planned, which meant he needed to escalate. The night Admiral Klein tried to bury me alive started like any other training day. Special evaluation, he called it during morning formation. Advanced stress inoculation training for selected personnel. Selected personnel.
Just me.
The other recruits gave me those looks, part sympathy, part relief that they weren't the ones being singled out. I'd seen those looks before. Hell, I'd given those looks before, back when I was a kid watching other kids get called to the principal's office. Report to Training Sector 7 at 2,100 hours, Klein announced. Full combat gear. This is a solo evaluation. Training Sector 7 was the remotest part of the base. It's where they conducted the psychological resistance training, the stuff designed to simulate prisoner of war conditions. Isolation. Stress positions. Sleep deprivation. The kind of training that pushed you right to the edge of human endurance and then asked you to keep going. I should have known something was different when I arrived and found no other instructors present. No safety officers. No medical personnel. Just Admiral Klein, standing next to what looked like a freshly dug pit in the ground. Your evaluation begins now, he said without preamble. Get in. The pit was maybe 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and about 4 feet deep. Big enough for a human body. Deep enough to hide someone completely if you wanted to. Sir, what's the nature of this evaluation? Confined space stress tolerance. You'll remain in the pit until I determine you've successfully completed the exercise. I climbed down into the hole, my heart already starting to race. Every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't standard training. This felt personal. This felt dangerous. Lie down, he ordered. I lay down in the bottom of the pit, looking up at the stars. For just a moment, it was almost peaceful. The night air was cool. The sky was clear. If I didn't know better, I might have thought this was some kind of meditation exercise. Then the first handful of dirt hit my chest. What the fuck? Silence.
Klein barked.
This is a simulation of battlefield burial. Combat stress inoculation. You will remain motionless and silent until the exercise is complete. More dirt. Falling faster now. Covering my legs, my torso, my arms. Sir, this isn't. I said silence. The dirt was up to my neck now. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. Panic was starting to set in, the kind of primal, animal panic that comes from being trapped, from being buried alive. Please, I managed to gasp. Sir, I can't. That's when he knelt down beside the pit and spoke in a voice I'd never heard from him before. Quiet. Conversational. Almost gentle. You know what your problem is? You think you belong here. You think that because you can run fast and shoot straight, you're worthy of wearing this uniform. But you're not. Another handful of dirt, this one landing right on my face. You're a pretender. A fake. A poor kid who's been playing dress-up and thinking nobody would notice. The dirt was in my eyes now, in my mouth. I tried to turn my head, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the pit pressed against me on all sides. But I noticed. From the very first day, I saw right through you. And I've been waiting for the right moment to show everyone else what you really are. More dirt. So much dirt. I could feel it filling the space around my head, cutting off my vision, muffling sounds. 6 feet deep, he whispered, and I could hear him standing up, could hear his boots crunching on the loose soil. No one will dig you out. This is where your story ends. Then came the worst part, the part that still wakes me up screaming sometimes. He started packing the dirt down with his boots. I could feel the weight of his body pressing down through the soil, compacting it around me, making it impossible to move. Each step sent vibrations through the earth that I felt in my bones. I tried to scream, but my mouth was full of dirt. I tried to move, but the packed earth held me like concrete. I tried to breathe, but each breath brought more soil into my lungs. And then, finally, silence. Admiral Klein walked away, leaving me buried in that pit like a discarded training dummy. Like garbage. Like something that had never mattered at all. I felt every handful of dirt hit my chest. I felt my lungs collapsing. I felt my consciousness starting to fade as my body shut down from lack of oxygen. And when I finally stopped moving, when the last spark of fight went out of me, I really thought it was over. I really thought I was going to die in that hole. But then I remembered something my father used to tell me when I was a kid, and the bullies at school would gang up on me. "Son," he'd say, "there's a difference between being knocked down and being knocked out. Long as you're still breathing, you're still fighting." I was still breathing.
Barely.
But still breathing. And deep down, in that place where rage lives, where pain turns into fuel, where poor kids learn to become something more than their circumstances, I made a decision. I wasn't going to die in Admiral Klein's grave. What happened next is a blur of desperation, survival instinct, and pure fucking rage. First, I had to create breathing space. Just a tiny pocket of air around my mouth and nose. I turned my head to the side, barely an inch of movement, but enough to create a small void in the packed earth. Then I started moving my fingers. Just the tiniest movements, loosening the soil grain by grain. My fingernails filled with dirt. My hands started bleeding from scraping against rocks and roots. But slowly, painfully, I created enough space to move my arms. It took what felt like hours. Maybe it was hours. Time has no meaning when you're buried alive, when every breath might be your last, when the weight of the earth is crushing down on your chest like the hand of God trying to squeeze the life out of you. But I kept moving. I kept fighting. Because that's what people like me do. We fight. When I finally had enough room to move my upper body, I started digging. Not up, that would have been impossible with all that packed earth above me. But laterally, toward where I remembered the edge of the pit being. My hands were destroyed by this point. Bleeding, torn, some of my fingernails ripped completely off. But I kept digging because the alternative was dying in Admiral Klein's hole, and I'd be damned if I was going to give him that satisfaction. I reached the wall of the pit, clawed my way up through loose soil and rocky earth. My face broke through to the surface like a drowning man gasping for air. For a moment, I just lay there, half buried, breathing the sweetest air I'd ever tasted. The stars looked different now. Brighter. More precious. Like I was seeing them for the first time. But then I heard footsteps. Admiral Klein coming back to check on his handiwork. Coming back to make sure his problem was permanently solved. I pulled myself the rest of the way out of that grave, dirt streaming off me like water. My legs were shaking. My vision was blurry. But I was alive and I was pissed, and Admiral Klein was about to learn that you can't bury someone who refuses to stay dead. He had his back to me, probably checking to make sure the dirt was still packed down properly, making sure his secret would stay buried. That's when I picked up the training rifle that had been left beside the pit. Standard issue M16, loaded with blanks for training exercises. I chambered a round and took aim. The gunshot that cracked through the night air was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Admiral Klein spun around, and the look on his face, Jesus Christ, the look on his face when he saw me standing there, was worth every second of hell he'd put me through. Terror. Absolute, pants-shitting terror. Because in that moment, he wasn't looking at a recruit. He wasn't looking at a poor kid playing soldier. He was looking at something that had crawled out of a grave, something that had refused to die, something that was very much alive and very much armed. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. Just this strangled gasp, like his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. "Surprised to see me, sir?" I asked, my voice raw from swallowing dirt. That's when he tried to run. Admiral Klein made it about 10 steps before he realized he had nowhere to go. We were in the middle of a remote training area, miles from the main base, with no vehicle and no backup. And I was between him and the only road out. "Now," I said, still pointing the rifle at his center mass, "you're going to walk back to base. And you're going to explain to the commanding officer why one of your recruits is covered in dirt and why there's a freshly dug grave in Sector 7. You don't understand," he stammered. This was just... Shut up. My voice was barely human at this point. More growl than speech. "Start walking." The march back to base took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of Admiral Klein stumbling through the darkness, while I followed behind him, rifle ready, dirt still falling from my uniform with every step. We passed 2 security checkpoints on the way. Both guards took one look at us, me looking like I'd been buried alive, Klein looking like he'd seen a ghost, and immediately called for backup. By the time we reached the main compound, there was a full reception committee waiting for us. Base commander, executive officer, senior enlisted, medical personnel, and a lot of very confused, very concerned faces. What the hell happened out there? The base commander demanded. I looked at Admiral Klein, giving him one chance to tell the truth. One opportunity to show a shred of honor or integrity or basic human decency. Instead, he tried to lie. Training accident, he said quickly. Recruit suffered a panic attack during confined space training. I was bringing him back for medical evaluation. A panic attack. After he buried me alive, he had the balls to call it a panic attack. That's when I spoke up. Sir, Admiral Klein attempted to murder me tonight. He buried me alive in a training pit and left me to die. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the ocean in the distance. You could hear the wind through the trees. You could hear Admiral Klein's breathing, shallow and fast like a cornered animal. That's impossible, the base commander said slowly. Admiral Klein is a decorated officer. A war hero. He would never. Then explain the dirt. I interrupted, gesturing to my uniform, my face, my hands. Explain why I look like I've been buried alive. Explain why there's a 6-foot pit in Sector 7 with fresh earth piled beside it. That's when the medical officer stepped forward and took a closer look at me. Really looked. At the soil ground into my skin. At the blood under my fingernails. At the cuts and scrapes on my hands from clawing my way out of the ground. My God, he whispered. You really were buried. And that's when Admiral Klein's whole world started to collapse. The investigation that followed was swift, thorough, and devastating. Within 24 hours, they had everything. Soil samples from Sector 7 that matched the dirt on my uniform. Photographs of the disturbed earth. Testimony from other recruits about Klein's pattern of harassment and abuse. But the most damning evidence came from something nobody expected. Admiral Klein had been so confident in his plan that he'd actually documented it. They found notes in his personal files.
Plans.
Schedules. A detailed psychological profile he compiled on me, complete with analysis of my breaking point and strategies for permanent removal from the program. Permanent removal from the program. Not dismissal. Not transfer. Removal. The son of a bitch had actually put his murder plot in writing. But here's where the story gets interesting, because while all this investigation was happening, while Admiral Klein was being questioned and suspended and lawyered up, something else was happening that nobody, including me, saw coming. 3 days after I crawled out of that grave, I got called to the base commander's office. I expected more questions, more statements, maybe some kind of counseling referral. What I didn't expect was to find 2 men in dress blues waiting for me. Men with insignia I'd only seen in training manuals. Special Operations Command, the very top of the military food chain. Recruit, the senior officer said. We need to talk. Turns out that while Admiral Klein had been busy trying to destroy me, other people had been watching.
People who mattered.
People who recognized that someone who could maintain perfect performance standards while under sustained psychological assault might be exactly the kind of person they were looking for. Your scores have been exceptional, the officer continued. Your resilience under pressure is remarkable. Your ability to maintain operational effectiveness despite deliberate sabotage shows the kind of mental toughness we need for specialized assignments. Specialized assignments. They were offering me a slot in a classified program. The kind of program that doesn't exist on paper. The kind of program that turns good soldiers into legends. But sir, I said, I'm still just a recruit. I haven't even finished basic SEAL training. Actually, the officer said with something that might have been a smile. You have. You've been under evaluation for the past 6 months. Every challenge Admiral Klein presented, every obstacle he placed in your path, every attempt to break you down, we've been watching how you responded. My blood ran cold. You knew? You knew what he was doing to me. We knew he was applying extraordinary pressure. We didn't know he would escalate to attempted murder. That crossed a line that should never have been crossed. They explained that the program they were recruiting for required individuals who could operate under the most extreme conditions imaginable. People who could maintain their humanity while surrounded by inhumanity. People who could be buried alive and still find a way to complete the mission. The fact that you're sitting here right now, after what you've endured, tells us everything we need to know about your character. 2 days later, I was promoted. Not just to graduate status. I was promoted 3 ranks and transferred to a unit that technically didn't exist. Admiral Klein, meanwhile, was still under investigation, which meant that when the official hearing was convened to determine his fate, I walked into that room wearing the uniform of an officer who outranked him. The hearing was held in a conference room that smelled like fear and furniture polish. Admiral Klein sat at one end of a long table, flanked by his lawyers, and looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His perfect uniform was still perfect, but there was something hollow about him now. Something broken. At the other end of the table sat a panel of senior officers who would determine his fate. And in the middle, as the primary witness, sat me. But I wasn't the same person who'd been buried in that pit. I was wearing different insignia now. I was carrying different authority. And when I spoke, people listened with a respect that had nothing to do with my background or my zip code. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings of Admiral Klein's threats. Video surveillance from the training areas showing him isolating me. Testimony from other recruits about the pattern of abuse. Physical evidence from the burial site. But the most damning moment came when they played a recording from Admiral Klein's own office. Apparently, he'd been so proud of his psychological warfare campaign that he'd actually bragged about it to a colleague. The little shit thinks he can play soldier, his voice crackled through the speakers. But I'm going to show him what happens when the wrong kind of people try to join our ranks. The wrong kind of people. Even after everything, even sitting in that hearing facing the end of his career, he still couldn't see me as anything other than a poor kid who didn't belong. When it came time for me to give my testimony, I stood up and looked directly at Admiral Klein. He tried to meet my eyes, but couldn't hold the gaze. The man who had buried me alive couldn't look at the person who'd crawled out of the grave. Admiral Klein told me that people like me don't survive long, I said, my voice steady and clear. He was right about one thing: I didn't survive. The person he buried in that pit died there. What climbed out was something different, something stronger. I paused, letting that sink in. He wanted to show me what happens when the wrong kind of people try to join our ranks. So let me return the favor. Let me show him what happens when the wrong kind of people are put in positions of authority over others. The verdict was unanimous. Admiral Klein was stripped of his commission, his benefits, his pension, everything. 30 years of military service, wiped out because he couldn't handle the idea that a poor kid might be worthy of wearing the same uniform. But the real justice came in the final moments of the hearing, when protocol required him to acknowledge my new rank. Admiral Klein, the presiding officer commanded, "You will stand and render appropriate honors to the witness." I watched him struggle with it. Watched him wrestle with the reality that he was being ordered to salute the person he'd tried to murder. Watched him realize that his attempt to bury me had instead elevated me to a position where he had to show me respect. Slowly, reluctantly, Admiral Klein stood up. His hand moved to his forehead in the most half-hearted salute I'd ever seen. "Sir," he muttered through gritted teeth. I didn't return the salute. Officers of my new rank weren't required to salute anyone below them. Instead, I just nodded. Once.
Coldly.
And said, "Dismissed." The last time I saw Admiral Klein, he was walking out of that hearing room, his shoulders slumped, his perfect uniform somehow looking shabby. A broken man who'd destroyed himself trying to destroy someone else. 6 months later, I'm standing on this cliff, watching the waves, and I can't stop thinking about graves. Not the grave Admiral Klein dug for me. I've made peace with that hole in the ground. I'm thinking about the metaphorical graves we dig for ourselves when we let hatred consume us. The graves we dig for others when we decide they don't deserve the same opportunities we've had. Admiral Klein didn't just try to bury me that night. He buried himself. He buried his career, his reputation, his legacy. All because he couldn't accept that worth isn't determined by where you come from. The irony is beautiful, in a twisted way. He spent so much energy trying to prove I didn't belong that he forgot to prove he did. He was so focused on keeping the wrong people out that he became the wrong person himself. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, especially as I start my new assignment. The program I'm part of now works with some of the most dangerous, most broken situations in the world. We go places where other people can't go. We do things that other people can't do. And we're successful because we understand something that Admiral Klein never grasped. Strength doesn't come from privilege. It comes from overcoming the lack of privilege. The best operators, the ones who survive and thrive in impossible situations, aren't the ones who've had everything handed to them. They're the ones who've had to fight for everything. The ones who've learned to turn pain into power, setbacks into comebacks, graves into launching pads. I should be dead right now. By all rights, that pit in Sector 7 should have been my final resting place. Instead, it became the place where I was reborn, where I stopped being the poor kid with something to prove and became something else entirely. Admiral Klein was right about one thing. People like me don't survive. We evolve. We adapt. We overcome. And sometimes, if we're really lucky, we get the chance to show our would-be destroyers exactly what they've created. He buried me to end my story. But sometimes, the grave becomes the place you rise from. The ocean is getting rougher now. The waves are bigger, angrier, crashing against the rocks with increasing violence. It reminds me that nature doesn't care about your plans, your prejudices, your carefully constructed ideas about how the world should work. Nature only cares about one thing: what survives. And I'm still here, still breathing, still fighting, still proving every single day that the wrong kind of people are exactly the right kind of people for the jobs that really matter. Admiral Klein thought he was burying a recruit that night. What he actually did was plant a seed. And what grew from that seed is something he never could have imagined, something that will outlast his memory and his failure and his pathetic attempt to play God with someone else's life. I am the weapon he forged in his hatred. I am the soldier he created through his cruelty. I am living proof that the human spirit is harder to bury than he thought. And every mission I complete, every life I save, every impossible situation I navigate successfully is a victory over the man who thought I didn't deserve to wear this uniform. Sometimes I wonder if Admiral Klein thinks about that night. If he wakes up in whatever civilian job he managed to find, wondering what happened to the recruit he buried. If he ever realizes that his attempt to end my story actually just marked the beginning of a much bigger, much more important chapter. I hope he does. I hope it eats at him. I hope he spends the rest of his life knowing that he had the chance to mentor someone, to build someone up, to be the kind of leader people remember with respect and gratitude. Instead, he chose to be the kind of leader people survive. And we did survive. Despite him. Because of him. In spite of everything he threw at us, and because of everything he taught us about what we never want to become. The wind is picking up now. The waves are getting louder. It's time to head back. But first, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in that pit? When the dirt was falling, when the air was running out, when it seemed like the world had decided you didn't matter, what would you have done? Would you have given up? Would you have accepted that this was your ending? Or would you have found a way to keep fighting, keep breathing, keep believing that you deserved better than someone else's grave? Because that choice, that moment when you decide whether to surrender or survive, that's the moment that defines everything that comes after. I made my choice in the dirt and darkness of Sector 7. Admiral Klein made his choice when he decided that some people matter less than others. We both have to live with the consequences. The difference is I'm still living. So tell me in the comments, what's your choice going to be? What are you going to do when life tries to bury you? How are you going to turn your graves into your gardens, your setbacks into your comebacks, your pain into your power? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Because your support, your stories, your shared experiences, that's what keeps this conversation alive. That's what reminds people like me that we're not fighting alone. That's what proves every single day that the wrong kind of people are exactly the right kind of people to change the world.
Stay strong.
Stay fighting. And remember, as long as you're still breathing, you're still in the game. Admiral Klein couldn't bury me. And whatever's trying to bury you right now can't keep you down either. Not unless you let it.